In 2010, Australian tennis player Sam Stosur reached the final of the French Open. She had enjoyed previous success in winning 2 doubles Grand Slams, but this was her first singles Grand Slam final. So sitting outside the women's dressing room before a big match, she was understandably nervous. She usually had her doubles partner Lisa Raymond to chill out with and to share some of the pressure, but this time she was on her own. Her coach David Taylor had never seen her so anxious, but spotted a golden opportunity to help her out when Rafa Nadal walked by. Nadal was the growing king of clay, who at that point had won 4 titles at Roland Garros. So Taylor asked him, "Rafa, do you have any tips for nerves?" Nadal turned around and simply said, "No, but when you work it out, tell me. It affects everyone." Nadal went on to win the men's final of the French Open the next day, claiming his 5th title in a competition that as of today, he's won 13 times. So it's somewhat surprising that the most dominant player ever on clay admits to having no idea how to deal with nerves. But he was right in saying it affects everyone. Whether you're heading onto the court at a major Grand Slam or lining up for a 5K fun run, we all face some form of pre-performance anxiety. And for some of us, it cripples us. The fear becomes too much, you choke under pressure, and you become even more of a nervous wreck. But for others, they somehow just deal with these feelings. They may not have found a way to eliminate them, but in some cases, they've actually used them as fuel to do the impossible and put in peak performances. So how can you develop this ability and successfully deal with pre-game anxiety? First, what is pre-game anxiety? It can differ person to person, but it's essentially an overwhelming feeling of fear, worry, and stress before competition. This can then lead to a range of things. Things like thinking you'll fail, shaking with nerves, or experiencing butterflies in your stomach. The thing is, these are all completely normal and only become a problem when the symptoms become too severe or too intense. In an ideal amount, pre-game anxiety helps you focus on the task at hand by taking it more seriously, and it also starts fueling your body with the substances needed for performing, such as hormones that help increase pain tolerance or make you feel more energized. So we should actually welcome pre-game anxiety somewhat in order for it to facilitate our performance. But as said, if you let that anxiety spiral out of control, that's when it completely consumes you and actually becomes debilitating. So what can you do to best manage it to that right level? Well, there's 3 things that any athlete can do. For the first thing, let's take ourselves back to the summer of 2006. The world had been watching one of the greatest football World Cups ever, except if you're an England fan. In the semi-finals, Italy beat host Germany to reach the final. There they would meet France, who on their way to the final had beaten favourites and holders Brazil. France were the more experienced, with several members of their squad already World Cup winners. And Italy as a nation was still shocked and disgusted at itself due to the uncovering of a mass match-fixing scandal in the country's 2 top divisions. For the Italian players, there was pressure like no other. It was an opportunity to restore faith and some respect among the Italian people, and a chance to bring some joy back to this football-loving nation. So the majority of the team felt that pressure. They felt extremely nervous and anxious, apart from one player. When midfielder Andrea Pirlo recalled the day of the final in his memoir, he wrote, "I don't feel pressure. I don't give a toss about it. I spent the afternoon of the final in Berlin sleeping and playing the PlayStation. In the evening, I went out and won the World Cup." Now I think Pirlo is somewhat exaggerating here, but I think there's a key lesson for any athlete to be aware of if they're to deal with their pre-game anxiety. And that is the lesson of detachment. In the build-up to a big match, race or event, the importance of it can consume us, often for days before it even arrives. And in allowing that to happen, this consumption creates a forever building sense of nervousness. We spend endless hours worrying about something that could still be days away. And this growing stress can negatively impact our sleep, our digestion, and many other things that could ultimately then damage our ability to perform on the day. So in the days and even hours before the big event, start actively engaging in things that's just going to help take your mind off of things. For Pirlo, this was watching video games. For you, it could be watching films, reading, or cooking. And this detachment can also be great as a team. It's not uncommon for athletes to play card games for hours when on the road, and while some of that is to pass the time, it's also to allow them to detach and keep those nerves at bay. But when you get to the arena or the location of your big event, of course, that's when you need to start reattaching again and focus on the performance at hand. And of course, that's when those feelings of nervousness and anxiety are going to resurface. But there is something that pretty much every elite athlete engages in that keeps those feelings in check and at bay. For Steph Curry, his involves a shot from the tunnel and a 100-yard dash in the corridor. For many Formula One stars, theirs involves listening to music to drown out the noise of the supercars they're surrounded by. And for Michael Phelps, his involved the famous 3-arm flaps. Each of these are examples of pre-performance routines, which are a set of behaviours or actions an athlete deliberately engages in to help them focus on the upcoming performance. And the interesting thing about them is that they provide the athlete with a sense of control, which is something that if you feel more of, you're going to feel far less stressed, anxious, and nervous. Because that's often the main source of pre-game anxiety, not having a sense of control over what's about to happen. So instead, if you focus your efforts on a set of routines that you have 100% control over, you're just going to feel a lot more confident and ready to put in that top performance. So for your pre-performance routine, think about doing a set warm-up, listen to a set playlist, have a set order of putting on your gear, even have the same set meal before competition. Because irrespective of sporting performances, we all like familiarity. It makes us feel safe and secure. Feelings that allow us to combat those other feelings of uncertainty that contribute to pre-game anxiety. And I did a separate video on why athletes have rituals, so check that out somewhere around here to find out a bit more on the how and why you should integrate these into your approach as an athlete. And in terms of the last thing you can do to better deal with pre-game anxiety, let's go back in time again, this time to 2008. It's the US Open and Tiger Woods is struggling. Physically, he's a mess. He's clearly hurt, but unknown to the crowd, he's actually playing on a double stress fracture and torn ACL. He knows that after this tournament he needs immediate surgery and a lengthy layoff from his sport. So the pressure is on. He wants to go out with a bang. But he struggles to get into a decent rhythm. He double bogeys the first hole in each of the first 3 rounds. Somehow he keeps within the leading pack and ultimately forces a final round 18-hole playoff with Rocco Mediate after a famous 12-foot birdie. This then comes down to a sudden death, with Woods ultimately edging out his opponent for what many call his greatest victory ever. And as he celebrates, Woods is asked by a reporter if he felt the pressure of making this astonishing comeback. And Woods responds, "Well, it's pressure, there's no doubt. I was nervous, and that's a good thing. That means you care. You can try and use that energy as best you can to heighten your focus and then get into the right situation." And what we see from Tiger Woods here is perhaps the most important thing that you can do as an athlete to better deal with your pre-game anxiety, and that's to reframe it. And how you do this is by changing the way you think about those feelings associated with being nervous and anxious. Essentially what psychologists call changing appraisals. Those who crumble under pressure and let the pre-game nerves get to them make threat appraisals, where they label all those feelings in their body as negative and harmful. Yet those who keep it together and thrive under pressure instead make challenge appraisals, where they perceive those same feelings as fueling them to overcome a challenge. The changes in our body that make us feel anxious actually have practical utility. So that increased heart rate is actually just pumping more blood and therefore more oxygen to target muscles and to your brain, so that you can make more powerful, better movements and also think more effectively under pressure. These things can indeed feel weird and perhaps a little uncomfortable, but as Tiger Woods said, they're ultimately there to heighten your focus. So when it comes down to it, your goal shouldn't be to get rid of your pre-game anxiety. Instead, it's about dealing with it better. And so in some cases, it's about delaying it by detaching yourself from the big moment. In other cases, it's about rechanneling it by engaging in pre-performance routines. And in other cases, it's about reframing it so that you can ultimately put in that peak performance.